Once upon a time, I made a presentation when I talked about silos, and I was corrected by a senior leader in the audience saying that no, we don't have silos, we have cylinders of excellence. I'll simply say that there are many cylinders of excellence being proposed by many parties right now.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of SCY Studios. My name is Jeff Slagle, and I'll be your host. I'm the president and CBDO at Skytalis, and we're really thrilled to have you with us today. We have a very special guest. Joining me is none other than Mr. Anil John, and I'm going to take a run at giving you a little bit of a background on Anil, and then we'll let him jump in and kind of fill in the parts that I miss. But Anil is a expert in the area of information security and has been working very long in this area. He and I first crossed paths many years ago, working inside the government on things that are related to how do we do identity better. At least that's my characterization. But he just has an absolutely phenomenal background and a very impressive resume. His education, he's by way of the University of Maryland, where he did study in engineering. I think that he did his master's work at Rensselaer University, and is a resident, at least I believe, right now in the DC metropolitan area. But he's a fantastic human being, and it's really a pleasure to have him joining us today. So I'd like to bring in Anil. Anil, welcome to SCY Studios.
Thank you, Jeff. And I will take the definition of expert, provided that the definition that we use is somebody who's tripped over their own feet and their own mistakes multiple times over the course of their career, and hopefully has chosen not to repeat them. If that is our shared definition of expert, I will take it. If it is anything else,
I hear you. I hear you. It most certainly is. Well, listen, Anil, I really am thrilled to have you on the show. And one of the things that I was hoping to do from the very outset, when we talked about standing up this platform to provide, this is really not meant to be a shameless marketing vehicle for my company or the things that we're involved in, but it really is meant to sort of take a topic or a subject du jour and really have a genuine conversation around what are the things that make sense and what are some of the tensions that are at play. Because one of the things that I think hopefully you'd agree with me on is that none of the things that we've been working on for the last decade plus aren't complex. There's all kinds of facets that come into play that I don't think that the average person, when they get introduced to this, really appreciate all of those little idiosyncrasies and nuances. And it's sort of one of those things that kind of comes with time. So for the benefit of the audience, would you mind maybe just sharing and giving a little peek into what you're doing right now as a paying gig? SVIP, what exactly does that mean?
Sure. I will simply note that this is not an official podcast for me. I am speaking as a public interest technologist in this, who's been in the field for a while. My current day job is I work for as a technical director at the Department of Homeland Security in our Silicon Valley Innovation Program, which is something that the department set up about 5 years ago in order to attract global startup talent that has innovative technologies and bring it into government. Having said that, I am hoping to not talk about anything that is related to my official duties or official things, given that I am out there on my own, Jeff.
I hear you. I hear you. And I too am, as much as I'm able to do that, taking off the company hat and wanting to, just have a shared conversation with a colleague and friend.
So it is interesting that you noted that the technologies and everything like that we've been working on are not complex. I agree with you. I think the complexity is when is a byproduct of people, right? And people, by their very nature, tend to be complex. And getting agreement, getting consensus, which is not agreement, but at least a shared understanding that we can live with the results, is often hard. And there is also, I think, in some ways, a desire to often not learn from the past and reinvent the wheel over and over again. That is prevalent in any technical community as well. So totally agree with you that technology can be understood.
Right.
But the people introduce a level of complexity that I'm sure will never go away.
No, they certainly won't. And I feel like I have to throw in my bumper sticker line that I've been sharing for the last 20 years. And I can't say that I'm the only person to ever say this, but when I thought about it, it rang true. And that is that most of us that are in the field that we're in have jobs predicated on the fact that people will always do what they're not supposed to do. So if people would, in fact, just do what they're supposed to do, then a great number of us would find ourselves out of work.
So the counter argument to that, obviously, is that people will always do what is in their best interest or the easiest course of action. So any designers or implementers of technical system have to take that into account to ensure that the outcomes that you're looking for are indeed where we end up at. So
right.
I think there is an inherent responsibility on system architects, system designers, usability engineers, privacy and security professionals, in order to understand they're not building technology in isolation. They'd have to take into account that great equalizer, people who use the technology.
Sure. Yeah. No, you're absolutely correct. And also for the benefit of not just yourself, but also hopefully the many people that will be watching this video once it's published. If you hear background noise, it's one of two things. It's the guy who decided to cut my grass in the last 5 or 10 minutes. He doesn't normally come until later in the day. And of course, because we're recording, he's here cutting the grass. Or my cat, Ahsoka. She's kind of running around doing her thing. So don't know if it's COVID, right? This has just become the new normal for so many of us working from home and whatever those distractions are. So the topic that I really wanted to throw out today, and we teased this up in advertising that we were going to be doing this video with you, is really around the topic of vaccination credentials and all of the ins and outs of what that means. And so, I again, leaning into some of my past work that I've done, there is the question of should something be done? And then there's a separate question of it's not a matter of whether it should be done or it should not be done. Presuming that a decision's made that it will be done, how then do you move forward in an intelligent manner? How do you take into consideration all of the competing variables that are at play? And I think that this ties back to something that you just talked about, and that is, well, depending on who you are, you're going to have different wants. You're going to have different needs. You're going to have different desires. with regards to, like, for example, as an individual, I don't want to have to give up more information about myself than I have to. And quite frankly, all the merchants that I interact with want to know everything about me they can. And I get it, but at some point you have to have some kind of a balance. So right now there is a common conversation happening around the planet. So this is not just a U.S. thing, and this is not just a North America thing, but there's a conversation happening around the planet right now that basically says, hey, vaccination credentials, there's something that people are experimenting with, there's something that people are dabbling in, and as you being the Anil John, I am super, super interested to know what your take is, and let's just start there.
Sounds good. By the way, just for the record, I didn't know that was the major topic of this conversation, but I'm going with it.
Okay. Well,
no. It's all good. It's a fascinating topic to be honest with you. Right?
Yeah, I apologize for that. Now, going back to where we started, I was very aware of the fact that in you and I talking about you coming on, that we did want to steer clear of any of the particulars that are connected to your day gig. And so this is one of those things where this is a poster child example of there's a technical conversation, there's a sociological conversation, there's an ethical conversation, there's a privacy conversation there. This is, like I said, I feel like that this is the poster child for us to kind of bat around and say, hey, what do you think? Good idea, bad idea? What are the ins? What are the outs? What are the pitfalls? But let's just kind of start there.
Sounds like a plan. Jeff, hopefully you're still there.
I'm producing, so I'm going to be doing camera work, putting you on camera by yourself.
Got it. All right. So it's interesting. So I am a naturalized citizen of the U.S. So before I became a citizen, I was obviously a permanent resident of the U.S. So it is interesting to me that if you actually do a search on U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and proof of vaccination, you will actually end up on a web page that basically talks to the fact that back in I think 1996, the U.S. Congress actually mandated that anybody, who is seeking to become a permanent resident of the U.S. or is already in the U.S. and wants to change their status to a permanent resident, has to provide proof of vaccination for a set of, vaccines. So this is something. In listening to a lot of the global conversations around, oh my God, nobody's asking for it. Why are we doing this? I've been fascinated by the fact that my personal experience and the experience of my wife, who's a Canadian citizen but a U.S. permanent resident, has been that we've had to provide proof of vaccination in order to, gain access to becoming a permanent resident and eventually a citizen, right? So this is something that Congress has in play, at least for the U.S. context. I'll also so that's one data point to keep in mind. So this is not something new. I know that I have my mom lives in India. When I went to get a visa in order to visit India, I actually had to provide proof of vaccination for a couple of things. I believe yellow fever and a couple of other things as part of the requirement for getting a visa to visit India. So this is something that other countries are also requiring as part of coming into the conducting travel and the like as well. Now, those are obviously clear examples of paper-based credentials that are issued in order to provide proof of vaccination. And Jeff, I also want to scope the answer to the question that you asked to proof of vaccination. I think the conversation obviously that is happening right now is much broader. It is about, how do you represent, testing results? How do you represent XYZ? From a personal perspective, I am not a doctor. even though my parents wanted me to become one. I chose a different path. I don't know what the science behind the efficacy of the testing is, and how the different test results can be represented and the like and things like that. So I'm going to focus on, just a core thing of you can basically have an attestation that you have been vaccinated or you've not been vaccinated. And again, all of us, for example, and my wife happens to be a middle school principal. It's a requirement in the U.S. when kids go to school. There is, you have to provide proof of vaccination and things like that. So again, from a social perspective, from within specific contexts, asking for proof of vaccination from a public health perspective is something that is already happening within the ecosystem, right? So that's one piece of it. Having said that, I also think that the current conversation about proof of vaccination, I fundamentally disagree with the term, vaccination passport. So I'll just keep to proof of vaccination as a terminology. Tends to be, as you noted, I will use much more blunter language in describing the conversation as it's a combination that is driven by public interest, public health, self-interest, marketing, in a variety of things that together make up this, swirling whirlpool of doom conversation around, what the next step should be, right? So I don't know where we will end up,
right?
But it is fascinating to watch, nevertheless. I think, and I'm speaking for myself, I think the biggest thing in any type of conversations around proof of vaccination, and a lot of the conversation obviously is revolving not around the paper-based proof of vaccination, but about some manner of digital representation of it, is the question of, I think, equity, access, people being a two-tier system being set up of have and have-nots if this technology is implemented. And these are not technology challenges. These are, social and cultural questions that need to be answered, that in a lot of ways may be falling by the wayside in the drive to put something online. Right. So I do think that there is a broader discussion that is needed to ensure that the application of this technology or the use of this technology is not disadvantaging a set of populations or a group of people that is if you go down that path.
Right. I know. I just kind of want to jump in. One of the things that concerned me when I heard some of the conversations happening about this, and I don't know that I like the term vaccination passport. I have my own reasons for why I might not like it. I think words matter, and so as much as we can try to come up with terminology that has a better shot at being, universally understood. But I couldn't break away from all of this ID management, ID security stuff that I've done for such a long time. And as you said, what we're really talking about is an attestation, and that is connected, that claim, if you will, is connected to an event. And a very important question that has to be answered is, how do I know that you as a carbon-based life form are actually bound to that, or more accurately, it's bound to you? How do we have confidence, in that? And you start to go down this road of, well, technology goes a long ways to helping to kind of prove that connection. It does, but only for a percentage of the population, not necessarily a large enough percentage of the population. And then there are conversations around, well, who is the one that determines, what that is. And all of a sudden I started hearing stories, at least here locally. I live in the state of Florida, where there were some businesses that were giving off hints that if you weren't vaccinated and couldn't prove that you'd been vaccinated, you weren't welcome. And it just obviously, it's a very slippery slope. And I think that, I mean, for me, I actually take it as a pretty heavy responsibility that I want to be feeding into and helping to facilitate things for the greater good. And, we look back through history, how many times did someone rush off to do something and it was actually meant to solve a problem, and it ended up creating a whole new crop of problems? It was unintentional, but it happened nonetheless. So you are, you're such a deep thinker, and I don't know if you play chess, but you strike me as a chess player kind of person. So trying to think out many, many moves ahead, as you might look at the board. I don't know. I just I understand a desire for the information. I also can visualize in my head a more optimal path that kind of gets people, I think, to where we might ideally like to go. But this is, I can't escape it. This is a classic example of, I think everybody wants the same thing. You got kids, I got kids. I want them to be happy and healthy and safe and secure. Period. I cannot fathom that there is another person on this earth that sees things any differently. Of course, I recognize that there are people that don't have children, but in general, I think that the overwhelming majority of people, want security and want safety and health and and all of this. This is, I don't think that this is disputable. How we achieve it, that's the rub. And I think that that's where there's so much differing opinions right now, and it's dizzying, quite frankly. I've sat down and been studying this from multiple angles for multiple reasons, and right now, borrowing from my children's vernacular, it's a hot mess.
So I totally agree with your children. I'd also note that I think, to your point, I do think that this conversation needs to be led by public health professionals and not by technologists. So I'm a bit leery that a lot of the conversation around, proof of vaccination, especially the digital version of the proof of vaccination, is in a lot of ways being done, led by, vendors, technology providers, and the like. And I think, to your point, I think the social and ethical aspects of it, and the potential unintended consequences of deploying this technology need to be addressed at a level that people buy into. To be honest, I'm not sure where that conversation is happening or if it is happening, because obviously I'm in the technology field. So what I see is a lot of the technology competition around it rather than the policy discussions. But I do think that this is a place where, policy and culture and what is acceptable and what is not needs to be defined first before this technology can be rolled out from a digital perspective. Otherwise, we're sort of just pandering to technologists and the desire for putting something on the market that sells product.
Right. Yeah. I agree. I agree.
So the other question in general in this area tends to be, the interesting thing about any type of proof of vaccination is that it's not used in isolation by itself, right? It's always used in combination with something like this. For example, I'm taking my kids to be enrolled in school. So as part of that enrollment process, I might be providing a lot of information about my kids to the school system. They also require, in addition to that, obviously proof of vaccination for something like this. If you are applying for a visa to go to a country, as part of that visa application process, there is a set of documentary evidence that I need to provide to that jurisdiction. And as part of it, they're also asking for something like this. So I just think that, at the technology level, and I am being very clear that if you are going down this path, the policy and the privacy and the equity conversations does need to be resolved, and there needs to be leadership, at the jurisdictional level in order to help, move that conversation forward, and not sort of, give up that responsibility or step away from that. But if you choose to do any type of implementation, given that these type of attestations are used in combination with others, I think global interoperability tends to be something that is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also something that I think a lot of people don't pay attention to. There are many. I think once upon a time I made a presentation when I talked about silos, and I was corrected by a senior leader in the audience saying that no, we don't have silos, we have cylinders of excellence. I'll simply say that there are many cylinders of excellence being proposed by many parties right now,
Yeah.
and an attention being played to something that is globally accessible, that does not leave people behind or on one side of the digital divide versus the other, that gives equity and access to anybody, everybody, that has a bridge to paper, so that people who are comfortable with the paper can just stick to the paper. But beyond all of that, it's also the policy. You mentioned, when you started out, that in the state of Florida, you're hearing rumblings about people, who are making, decisions on whether or not proof of vaccination needs to be provided before they will provide service or not. I would say that type of conversation needs to be done. If you want equity and access, needs to be sort of had at a national level, or at least at a state level. At least at some jurisdictional level, so that there is a common understanding of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable for that particular community or that particular jurisdiction, right? I'm just concerned about those type of things, because I think the unintended consequences of not having that conversation and simply rolling out technology in the hope technology will be the band-aid that sort of solves problems, I think is a path to nowhere.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. I'd like to go back and revisit something that you said just a minute ago about a global approach, or at least the way I heard it, the value of standards, and sort of maybe lots and lots of people missing that and not really appreciating that. It occurred to me at some point, and I don't think that this is a surprise for the viewers that will be checking out the video, that for the last 22 years, I've been completely preoccupied with driver licenses, and how do we get people on the same page? And you can take the guy out of AMVA, you cannot take the AMVA out of the guy. I still am fiercely protective of this idea that that work ultimately does save lives. Getting it right and knowing who it is that you're interacting with, making sure they've got a secure credential and a way of knowing that they're connected to it ultimately does, it really does save lives. I believe that. I challenge anyone, change my mind on that one. And I know that one of the things that has helped make that better, doesn't mean that it's perfect, but it's better, are standards. And the coordination that has gone on. So it wasn't just a North American thing with AMVA, it was AMVA working with its counterparts in Europe and its counterparts in Australia and its counterparts in Asia. And no, we don't have the entire world at the table as much as we would like the whole world at the table, but the work is being done in a venue where if people wanted to be a part of it, they could. So, messaging and continuing to get the word out that, hey, there are activities that are going on. And then we now are on this electronic frontier of, a global approach to, hey, how can this kind of the same function that's been a physical thing turn into an electronic thing? But my gosh, there are so many moving parts and there are so many moving pieces. And I celebrate the progress that's been made, but it is kind of like building, a skyscraper. We've got a really nice foundation, and we've already got 10 or 11 stories. But knowing that this thing is ultimately going to be hundreds of stories, we have a long ways to go. So and I cheer for all of the professionals that are involved. That are involved in the work. And I'm quoting you in saying that if you're in the business of selling hammers, I guess everything kind of looks like a nail. So I have to admit, I'm plagued by a little, got the glasses on where it's like, well, this stuff that I've been working on appears to be a pretty good candidate for stepping in and maybe being part of the, answer, but I don't think that it's the answer. I don't think that it's, completely the answer. And I actually shy away from, and I'm scared by the people that would say, you just need fill in the blank, this one, magic panacea silver bullet thing. And then, you're good to go. I reject that. I don't think such a thing exists, which means that I think that the work in front of the world and trying to keep it, to this conversation around the vaccination attestation and the term I would use, credential. It's got to be very open, and there's got to be lots and lots of different interests that are involved. Have you kept up with, and were you aware of the conversations happening with the World Health Organization and the lobbying that's going on by one particular crew of people that have worked on a particular standard who shall not remain nameless because they're all colleagues of mine? But I can tell by your grin and your head nod that you have.
I am tracking the work at the WHO. Obviously, their release candidate one, piece was made public some time ago as well. We'll come back to that if you don't mind. But I sort of wanted to address one piece of it, right? And I keep hammering on the policy and the exceptions and things like that. I think one thing that I also forgot to mention when I talked about that law that Congress put on the books from 1996 for proof of vaccination was also they also have waivers for people who for religious reasons or for some other reason do not want to provide proof of vaccination. So equity does not just means that everybody has access to a vaccination proof or something like that. Equity also means that there is choice being provided to people who may choose for whatever reason, whether it is medical or some other reason, to not get a vaccine. So how do you address that within the context of these type of things? So that's critically important in the policy and the implementation discussions in when we want to provide a true level playing field for everybody,
Right.
and not just for the privileged few.
Right.
So that's important to keep in mind, right? So, but to your point, yeah, I'm on the plus side. WHO is a global health organization, and it is something that obviously is trying to bring together a global community in order to sort of digitize their original, yellow card in a piece of it. And I'm glad that they're actually focused purely on the proof of vaccination and not anything beyond that, and not about testing or the like. And again, but as in any large organization, anybody who thought that the technical community did not have drama, did not have politics, they are woefully mistaken, right? We have our own, dramatic people and our, politicians du jour in our technical community, and obviously in any large organization, especially a multilateral organizations, that obviously will come into play and is coming into play in both the, not just in the WHO, but also in the other, technical standards organization as well. I do think that I would say that that's also that, I happen to believe that there is a role for government in ensuring that that discussion ends up on a level playing field, so that the interests of one party are not actually overriding the interests of everybody else. So I do think that that is a role that should be played by jurisdictions and government authorities in standards and multilateral organizations in order to ensure equity and access for everybody. Now, I'm not sure if everybody would agree with me, but that's something that I believe from that perspective, right? So
No,
yeah, so I'm familiar with the WHO work, familiar with the different voices that are being brought to bear
Right.
to influence their decisions one way or the other.
Right. So you brought up an interesting term, and it's one that I think, and again, I'll put the disclaimer on this, that this is Jeff's opinion on this, but I do think that it is conflated oftentimes with another term, and that is equality. So for the purposes of our conversation, I just would like everybody to, understand when you're using the term equity, you mean it in the respect that you're talking about it versus what maybe the term equality would mean. And I just want it, I don't want to put the words in your mouth. So for the benefit of the viewers, when you're using equity, you're using it in the context of.
I'm using it in the context. So I have not, parsed the words and parsed their definitions from a dictionary perspective. So forgive me, as my explanation of what equity means differs from the textbook definition of what it is. Or I would make an argument that whatever I say next, Jeff, there will be 15 other, definitions that will be brought that are either agrees or completely is in disagreement with. For me, as somebody who's been working in this field, I have always believed that it is clearly important that everybody have equal access to whatever capabilities, services, technologies that everybody else has access to. There should not be any precondition on access to said technology. I also believe that an aspect of that is also by just because you have access to technology and you use that technology, that choice that you make in there should not be used to discriminate against you in any shape or form. Or if you choose not to use that technology, that should not be a reason to discriminate against you from that perspective. So I'm not sure if that actually defines the understanding of equity, but that's the way that I'm sort of operating, in how I think about how these technologies should be considered.
Absolutely. And so again, going back to the conversations that are happening right now, and sort of this parallel back to, I have commented repeatedly, and I've gotten to the point where I can't talk about this without laughing, that people who are dependent, or entities that are dependent on identification, have funny ways of determining what is acceptable for them, for someone to prove that they are who they say they are. I can't separate that from the conversation we're having right now. Meaning that we can come up with, at a policy level, well, this is the list of acceptable things, or these are credentials that would be acceptable, or that whatever. That relying entity can follow that regulation, or follow that law, or follow that mandate, or they can do their own thing. People do their own thing all the time. I'm not going to pick on anybody, but let's say you were, a business, and you were having to ask for ID, and it was very clear that the reason that you were asking for ID was to try to ascertain what someone's age might be. It's probably not going to be a very dependable form of ID if someone shows you a Blockbuster card. Are you with me?
I'm with you.
I still have my Blockbuster card. It's got my name on it, but it's not a really great ID document. And yet there would be people out there that would, sort of say, well, I just need to see something. Just show me anything. And so I then point out that, well, that's a system that then is susceptible to not operating or not functioning the way that it was intended to. And I'm just curious about, wherever the World Health Organization lands, and wherever some of these other efforts go, ultimately you've got a limitless, you cannot number them, all of these, either people or entities that will make up their minds on what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. And I don't think we escape that. I don't know how we escape that. I think that human element, or that factor, that variable, if you will continue to be in play, no matter what happens. And this transcends the topic of vaccination, attestation, and just gets into ID writ large. So it doesn't, it doesn't really matter. I think that the relying party, or the dependent entity, whatever, still is going to have some discretion over what they do. Oh, and before I forget to mention it, here in Florida, some people started saying, hey, this is a first step towards, a demand for papers. And that's not okay. And that has been the recurring chorus of people that I've heard against a national ID scheme, at least in the US. That's not okay. And I agree, that's not okay. And I don't ever want to facilitate or be a party, to anything that would lead in that direction. And yet it's undeniable, and I think history supports this, that there have been people that have been involved in things that they thought were rather innocuous, only to find out down the road, oh crap, that actually kind of, opened the door, or, got us, it was the first domino, to kind of fall and to kick off a list of other things. So I'm just curious about, what your thoughts might be on that.
So there were multiple pieces in there. Yes, I am enjoying that particular mug, just for the record. I remember having a conversation about 10 years ago with the CEO of a European firm, right? And I think just about and it was about identity in general, and how Europeans in a lot of the European countries view identity versus how US viewed identity more than anything else. And I think where we left that conversation was, in a lot of ways, it comes down to the confidence that you have in some entity as an authoritative source, right? So, for example, I think his comment was that in a lot of ways, Americans find it easier to trust the public sector. Again, this was 10 years ago, than perhaps governments, while in Europe, the reverse was true. It is easier for a lot of the European countries to actually trust their governments rather than the private sector. I would say that may have changed over the last 10 years. So that does have an impact on, to your point. My sense is there will never be a support for the one ring to bind them all within the U.S. That is not the perspective of the United States. So having a national ID scheme is something that's a path to nowhere within the U.S. context as of right now, right? So I also think that coming back to the topic of the broader proof of vaccination and things like that, I think it does matter who is designated as the authoritative source of vaccination data. My, Anil John's personal opinion is that it should be a public health authority. And that is for a particular reason. As you noted, we both have been in this field for a long while, and we've seen what happened in the identity world in instances where a jurisdiction, whether it is at the local state level or at a federal level, was not willing to stand behind authoritative data or records, even from the perspective of not sharing that record, but even acknowledging the existence of that record using some sort of a match, no match infrastructure, right? So, I am not asking you for information about the details, but can you at least tell me if this record with ABC elements exists as a record within your system, yes or no? That's been really hard. And in the absence of that, what we have is a proliferation of data brokers who troll the transaction exhaust of our lives and basically sell them to people for identity validation purposes. Validation from the perspective of, is this set of data hold together? Is it a legitimate record or not? Right. So that actually, I think, is one of the challenges in the identity proofing ecosystem that we have in the US that some of the other countries or other jurisdictions do not. How that applies, I think, to the current discussion around proof of vaccination is that, I'm hearing from multiple people that I have conversations with that the same type of desire is being manifested by the same data brokers who are approaching hospitals, approaching vaccination centers to get access to their data, pay them for that data, and try to do some sort of a pay-to-play effort. I think that's very dangerous and very bad. Which is why, for me, at least understanding who are the authoritative source of data around this, whether it is the state immunization systems or some other public health infrastructure, is, I think, relevant and important in this discussion. Now, it doesn't mean that they are going to issue some manner of credential, but can they at least be the source of data that is being used for at least a match, no match against it, so that you're respecting the privacy of the people, you're not exposing or sharing data, but at least that this record exists, and you still, because I think without that, we will end up in this area, the same place where the identity ecosystem is ending up in, with this trolling of massive amounts of data from public sources and monetizing on top of that by the data brokers and selling that as services. So as you can see, I am not a fan of said services, right? So I believe there is a role for government in sort of standing behind the data. And my understanding is that there was a Office of Management and Budget policy memo that was published, I think, over the last 2 to 3 years that talked to exposing those data as services for identity validation purposes. Again, not sharing the data, but simply providing some APIs or mechanisms that, does this record exist? Yes, no, full stop, right?
Right. Right.
And there are very few entities, as you well know, within the US that can actually stand behind that type of data.
Right.
And typically those entities tend to be jurisdictions.
Yeah.
The DMVs at the states, your old stomping grounds, are such an entity. They are authoritative. They can stand behind it. I think there are, I'm sure, federal sources of data as well. So yeah. I'm just concerned that without the designation of that, you basically go down the path of data broker transaction exhaust.
I violently agree with what you're saying. So not just regular agree, but violently agree with what you're saying. And while I agreed to take my hat off and not do a shameless plug for my company, I will go ahead and give a quick shout out for my former employer. They in fact have this very capability that you're describing for driver licenses. And it's called the Driver License Verification Service. And the idea is that if someone encounters a driver's license, they are able to go through this particular application, and AMVA, acting as a sort of a hub, if you will assist in taking that very small minimal data set and doing a query with the jurisdiction of record to just simply get a match, no match. That's it.
So you know that I'm not going to let you get away with that particular statement, right? So I will, let me pick on you on that one, right? So the service exists,
yeah,
but not all states are party to it, right? So that's one piece of it, right?
That is true. They have over the years been adding more and more jurisdictions to that, and I have not looked in a while, so I don't know where that particular map sits, but it was getting more and more filled in.
Got it.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are also rules of the road regarding, who has access to what data, is there a cost to use the service and things like that. So I understand the service exists. I remember, I think back in the day, I believe the NSTIC program actually championing, I think, a pilot or to help with that for precisely addressing some of the challenges that I mentioned, access to authoritative source of data as part of some sort of an identity proofing process. But I also don't want to leave people with the impression that this magical service that touches all 50 states exists for anybody to come in and use, right? So
no, and that was, and I certainly apologize if it came out.
I'm just picking on you, man. That's all.
That kind of capability is something that only would exist in a galaxy far, far away. But definitely not here, not now. There's a lot of goodness, at least tied up in those concepts that you're describing.
So fundamentally, I think our violent agreement is around the fact that, in general, in the remote identity proofing aspects for whatever type of credential, right? So we've sort of stepped away from the proof of vaccination piece, but in general, for any type of service delivery, if there is a desire to do remote identity proofing, obviously the process is pretty conceptually straightforward. You need to resolve a person uniquely within a particular population set. And in order to resolve them, you need to collect a set of attributes against them. And you're laughing at this because this is how we first met back in the day, right? So, yeah. So, but the challenge has always been that once you collected this set of data that hopefully resolves that person uniquely within a population set, whether it is within the context of a company or within the context of the United States itself, how do you ensure that that set of data actually hang together, that it is indeed legitimate? And the only way to truly assure that it is indeed legitimate is actually going against an authoritative source in order to do a match no match. And that's the piece that we've lacked forever within the US. And that's the reason the data brokers are playing that field. Of course, validation of that data, is the record true? Is it accurate? Does it exist? Is not enough. To your point, what you brought up earlier, now you need to make sure that the person who is asserting that set of data that has been validated as being true is indeed the carbon-based life form to whom that said data belongs. That is where the verification piece comes in, and a secure binding process that needs to be put into place in order to map a person onto that set of data and have a technical ability to verify that mapping using whatever verification mechanism that you might choose to use. Whether it is multi-factor authentication, whether it is biometrics, whether it is some other mechanism for doing so. Then obviously there are a variety of assurance levels associated with all of them that come into play depending on the seriousness of the service or the data that you need access to. But I fundamentally agree that the second step is something that is really relevant, and unfortunately is something where we as a jurisdiction have sort of fallen upon. I've always been very jealous of the Australians. All right, so they have this, I think, infrastructure, I think they call DVS, I believe, that basically has the ability to do these match no match against authoritative sources of data, whether it is passport, whether it is driver's license, whether it is some other type of breeder document, that I think originally that they stood up only for government use, but now they also expose it as, I believe, a fee service to the private sector, as part of an identity proofing capability. So I've been totally jealous of them and what they've done there. I think the UK Verify team, or whatever they're calling themselves these days, also stood up a service as part of what they deployed within the UK that allowed them to do a match no match against, I think, passport and driver's license data within the UK as well. So these are all countries who recognize that there was value in ensuring that authoritative sources of data could be stood up and could stand behind them from a identity proofing perspective. And I'm sure that they've gained significant value there as well.
So yes, and that admittedly is a better direction for others to go in. I would contend that is something that's been happening here, maybe not with the speed, and perhaps that has something to do with our size. Admittedly, Australia is 275 million less people, or whatever. But these are things that I do think that we're going to continue to work towards. So, without looking for you to commit yourself to a future reappearance on SCY Studios, I really hope you will say yes. I know I would love to visit with you again. And I don't actually think, Anil, we even scratched the surface of all the stuff that I really was hoping to talk about with you today. And only kind of here towards the end of our time are you bringing up some things that I really would love to throw out at you and say, well, let me get your take on, because in the old days, so much of what we have is what we inherited as ID schemes were all predicated on the fact that there was no internet. There was no online capability. You were going to be in isolation with this person trying to figure out the best that you could. Hey, do I know who they are? And now that we have that online capability, what can be done with it? And even, with technology, it is possible that we can send something out where you don't have to be online. And you actually could have confidence that this person that you're interacting with actually has something that is trustable. The data that you're kind of depending on actually came from an authoritative source. And these are the kinds of things that, again, would love to bounce off you in that big brain. But I'm not going to push my luck with trying to get into that today, as really, this was meant to be a conversation just around, again, what are all these nuances? And there are some people I know that are going to watch this video that you've brought up, and you're talking about something in a way that they'd never thought of before. They'd never really considered, some of these aspects. And I think that's the value in having these kinds of conversations, is that they are educational. And every time I have one, I walk away a little better. I see you, and I didn't say this for the benefit of the viewers, but you and I met a long time ago, and it was around the work that you were describing, but we became pretty fast friends around a shared interest. And that shared interest is sci-fi and geek culture.
Absolutely.
And what I wanted to do is sort of, as we've been talking, I've not so subtly worked in to the conversation, some clues on where my allegiance lies and where your allegiance lies. And so if people were really paying close attention, as you've been on camera, there are tells that would let them know where your allegiance lies. But before I go ahead and do the big reveal on screen, I do want to say that I've always thought of you as a Sarek. I see you as this very wise, cerebral ambassador for the wonderful work that's been happening inside of the identity management community around the planet. And that really is, while that sounds like a joke or tongue-in-cheek, that's actually sincere. I do actually see you as, if we put together, the top list, of people and intellects and, personalities that have influenced what we've been doing for good, for me, you're at the top of the list. If I'm not like a huge sports person, so I don't have the jerseys with, the names of the athletes on the back. But if I had a jersey for the stuff that we do with identity management, it would have John on the back.
So I thank you for that kind thoughts. I will simply note that I think one thing that I've learned is that persistence has a value all its own. I think part of it is just like you, I've been in this field for some time, and I've been consistent in that field, just like you, right? So I think it's not a matter of deep thinker or whatever. I think it's a matter of, both you and I have just kept on trying to do the right things at the right places at the right time, and hoping that something succeeds. So I'm still hoping for that, by the way. So
right. As am I. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and throw up the answers in case anybody was wondering where our allegiances lie. So I think we've proved today that whether your allegiance is to Trek or your allegiance is to wars, you can still work together, come together for common cause, common good. I thought you'd get a little kick out of that, and I know you've got a model of I believe it's the Enterprise.
Yes,
I don't know what series it is.
It's the original one.
Okay, yeah, but I'm ending every one of my interviews with the same question for all of my guests. So you are now going to be carrying on this tradition, and the person that we bring on next will get this as a final question. And that is, if you were emperor for a day, and I don't mean Palpatine, but I mean, if you were emperor for a day and you could do whatever you wanted to do to try to affect some kind of change for the work that you've been involved in, what exactly would it be? What would you do?
That's a hard question to answer. I think I'll bring it back to what I mentioned earlier, Jeff. I do think that in anything that we do, interoperability is a critical component of ensuring that choice exists in the marketplace, that innovation can be built on a foundation of security, privacy, and I don't think people pay enough attention to it. So what I would wave my magic hat around is that any technology or any implementation that people bring to the table would have to first and foremost go through a two-step process in order to verify true interoperability of the solution. One of them is ensuring compliance against some globally accepted standard that is acceptable to all. And second is basically showing true end-by-end interoperability by ensuring that everybody connect to everybody else's system and that it actually does connect and talk without any hiccups. So I would mandate global interoperability verification for any systems or technologies that we would want to deploy in scale and not buy into the interoperability theater that is currently going on right now.
Awesome. That is a fantastic thing. I would agree. That would be an awesome thing to have. And also, should I come across a magic hat, I will be putting it in the mail and sending it to you so that you can go ahead and you can do that. Dare I say, an infinity gauntlet. So maybe the next time we're able to visit, we can spend a little bit more time talking geek culture in addition to talking work. But listen,
absolutely. As just on that point, right? I absolutely want to talk about the Marvel Universe and Babylon 5, just for the record.
Okay. Well, and we'll set it up. The next time we have a conversation, we will make sure that we include Marvel and Babylon 5 into the dialogue. So, Anil, thank you so much. I sincerely mean it. You've been a trusted friend and a great colleague for many years and a mentor to me. And so it was a big deal and a big thrill to have you on today. So thank you. And to the folks that have tuned in and have taken the time to watch the video, thank you for stopping by. We hope that you'll catch a future edition of SCY Studios as we're going to continue to bring to you relevant content and continue the conversation around things that are impacting what's going on in the identity management community. And so with that, I hope you have a great day, and thanks so much.